Thanks, Sharon. My first guest tonight is the Environment and Energy Minister, Josh Frydenberg. I spoke to him a short time ago. Josh Frydenberg, welcome.
Nice to be with you, PK.
You were seeking legal advice on whether the decision by South Australia to go it alone was in fact legal. What's the advice that you've received?
Haven't received that advice, hoping to receive that next week.
And do you anticipate, have you been given any indication? Because Jay Weatherall thinks he's on very firm ground.
Well, let's just wait and see. I mean, the point is that what the Premier of South Australia announced, with new powers going to the Energy Minister in South Australia to direct the Australian energy market operator, does go against the spirit of the existing rules, and let's just see whether it goes against the letter of those rules. On
the Snowy Hydro deal announcement, obviously for a feasibility study, but the government's certainly very attached to this idea as a big answer. Are you drawing a line under coal by making this announcement?
No, I think they're different issues because the Prime Minister's made clear that our policies are all of the above when it comes to the type of generation. There's a role for fossil fuels and there's an increasing role for renewables. The great benefits of the Snowy Hydro proposal as put forward by the Prime Minister is that it provides baseload power and it also provides renewable power. Now, an extra 2,000 megawatts is a 50% increase on the existing capacity of the Snowy Hydro scheme, with the benefit to some 500,000 homes. Cost $2 billion to build. The feasibility study will be completed by the end of this year, and then hopefully it can get cracking next year.
So where does it leave coal? Do you still see room to build a clean coal power station? Is that still one of the policies you want to pursue?
Well, 2 points. The first is that coal continues to be a critical part of our energy
Hazelwood's
security
about to close down. It's a diminishing role.
And that is right, that it has that we've seen a number of coal-fired power stations, in fact 9 coal-fired power stations close over the last 5 years, and Hazelwood is 1,600 megawatts and the Snowy Hydro proposal is 2,000 megawatts. But the first point is that coal continues to be a critical part of our energy mix. It provides more than 60% of our power.
Sure, that's
across
in the
country.
Existing scenario. I'm talking about going forward.
Yeah, and
do you still think it's worth pursuing?
The second point is that these high-efficiency, low-emission coal-fired power generation plants are popping up right throughout our region. There are more than 700 of them, and in countries like Japan, which have commensurate emissions reduction targets to Australia, they already have a large number and building another 45. So we need to seriously investigate that sort of proposal here for Australia, and the Resources Minister, Matt Canavan, who's also the Minister for Northern Australia, has talked about the possibility of one for North Queensland.
Is one in North Queensland something that you're interested in as well? Is that where you would like to see it?
I'm certainly interested in investigating seriously these proposals. At the same time, we are working assiduously with the LNG suppliers to get more gas into the market, because the peaking power of the gas-fired power plants are increasingly important in stabilising a system and setting the price of electricity, and we are seeing more wind and solar come into the system through the support that we are providing as well.
So the Snowy Hydro number 2 scheme, even 2.0 to be very specific, but you know, second round. Ultimately, this could take, you know, you say maybe 4 years, but a lot of the experts say at least 7. This is a very long-term plan. You have an emergency on your hands. As I say, Hazelwood about to close, something looming right now. You don't actually have the answers for right now.
Well, that's why the meeting with the gas producers was so important, because AEMO had told us just the week before that we will have gas supply shortages in the states of Victoria and South Australia and New South Wales.
That gas meeting you see as the solution to our immediate problems?
I see it as absolutely critical to the immediate challenges we face.
Is that plan so solid now? You've got a guarantee so solid from those gas producers that they will redirect to the domestic market, that you think that up to 7 years we will be covered as a nation not to see any blackouts this summer?
Well, they have committed to us that there won't be any shortfalls in the gas market. So we won't see a repeat of what we saw with Pelican Point in South Australia, where they had a second 240 megawatt turbine that they didn't bring on because they said they couldn't get the gas contracts. So that won't happen again. Now,
so how rock solid is that commitment? Because there's been reporting, I know the Fin Review certainly saying it's vague. The commitments are vague.
Well, the Prime Minister sent an unequivocal message to those gas suppliers that they have a social licence to operate, that he has, as the Prime Minister, significant constitutional powers, and he's talked about export controls, but he's looking for an industry-led response. Now, they gave him that firm commitment. I was in that meeting in no uncertain terms, and the Prime Minister said that he would like to meet again in 1 month's time to follow through on that commitment. So work is already getting underway to ensure that we lock in that commitment.
Let's talk about that. So in a month, would you like to see a written agreement, something that's signed off by the government and the producers, actually mandating a certain percentage, something very tangible to redirect gas supplies?
Well, the first point is that we don't want to see any shortages, and we got that commitment, so we're now going to implement it. The second point that the Prime Minister emphasised was that those LNG providers at Gladstone and the three major ones become net contributors to the domestic market, meaning that they don't pull out from the domestic market more than that they contribute. Now, 2 out of those 3 players already are doing that, but 1 is not, and they took the Prime Minister's point on notice, and so hopefully they'll come back to us on that.
So you don't have a response yet on that being taken on notice?
Well, obviously, for them, they're in a more difficult position because they don't have the excess capacity domestically, and that's why they're buying off the domestic market. So you're seeing gas from the Cooper Basin or from the Gippsland Basin going off to Queensland.
So what are your levers with that? What do you do there? Because they've taken it on notice, but when do you expect some genuine response and a plan?
Well, obviously we're continuing to engage with them, and we've sent them a very unequivocal message as to what we expect them to do. The first job we have is to lock in this commitment.
And that will be something very detailed that people can see and that is signed off by the producers?
Well, certainly we are working through with those LNG suppliers the details of that commitment. You've got to take them at face value, and certainly the Prime Minister got down to business straight away with them.
Employment in the renewable energy sector fell by 16% according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics. I'm assuming you've seen that. What do you make of that figure? Are you disappointed?
Well, the Clean Energy Council has actually just put out a press release saying they're seeing record investments in renewables.
Sure, but these are ABS figures.
But they're seeing record investment in renewables, and more so than ever since the Snowy Hydro itself came into being. So we are seeing greater investment in renewables. We are seeing more jobs in renewables. But the Labor Party talks about a 50% renewable energy target, creating 28,000 jobs. Well, at a cost of $48 billion, that's $1.7 million a job in renewables. So I'm not about to sign on to more jobs in renewables if it's going to come at the cost of manufacturing in this country or a stable or affordable.
So you're not worried
system.
about those ABS figures?
No, I'm not worried about those ABS figures, because what we have seen is increased investment in renewables, particularly incentivised under the renewable energy target. But we have to be careful and considered as to how we integrate renewables into the system, because not all electrons were created equal, Patricia, because the key point is wind and solar. When the sun's not shining, when the sun's not shining, the wind's not blowing.
Agnostic and non-ideological.
That's true.
Well, if you're not saying they're not created equal,
because,
I mean, you're trying to treat them on the merit.
No. This is the crux of the issue, because when the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining, power is not being generated. That's the first point. And that the stability of the system relies on what are called frequency control and ancillary services and inertia that you get with gas, that you get with hydro, that you get with coal. You don't get with wind and solar. That's something that Alan Finkel in his security review is trying to fix.
On your stoush with Jay Weatherall, that moment, really it's being played on repeat, sort of everyone's watching it every couple of minutes.
People are obviously too bored.
Well, it's certainly good television. Do you take some personal responsibility that you have played such hardball politics on this, that you just push South Australians and the Premier representing them over the line? Everything has been a political attack about South Australia.
Look, when it comes to Jay Weatherall, they were in denial for so long. They said that it was the fault of a Liberal previous government in South Australia, more than a decade ago, because they didn't build a second interconnector. Then they blamed the Australian Energy Market Operator. Then they blamed the weather.
Sure.
Then they blamed the federal government. But our point was they were in charge of managing the system and they didn't prepare for it. Now, at that press conference, to quote Paul Keating, the Treasurer the Premier went a bit troppo. And, I just tried to keep my head, let him speak, and then respond with the facts.
You can say he went troppo, but how do you work with him in the future? Because you have to. You have to actually put all this aside, because voters don't care who you represent, what political parties you're from. They just want you to get on with the job.
It's interesting in the days after that, in that little stoush, as you call it, the people even of South Australia rejected their Premier's approach. They thought it was highly inappropriate.
What are you basing that on?
Well, I'm basing it on Today Tonight. They did a poll. I'm basing that on...
So you're saying the polling's showing you're winning?
Well, the polling is showing that the people are holding Jay Weatherill to account, as they rightly should, for what takes place in his own state. Now, as for getting on with South Australia, of course, we want South Australia at the table. We have a national electricity market. We have a system that's more than 5,000 kilometres long and, the most interconnected system in the world. I have a very good working relationship with South Australia's Energy Minister, and we need, to continue that good working relationship. Would
you like to take some of the politics out then yourself? Will you make that pledge that you'll try and take some of this biffo, hyped up language out to try and get on with the job?
Well, Patricia, of course we want to find as much common ground as possible, but we're not going to pursue our Labor opponents or indeed Labor states down a road of bad policy if that's what they're proposing. That's the key point. And, as Rudyard Kipling said, you've got to keep your head when all those about you are losing theirs, and that's what happened the other day.
All right, 2 questions. Gay marriage. Peter Dutton has criticised CEOs, really quite extreme criticisms, particularly of Alan Joyce, the Qantas CEO, saying that, it wasn't appropriate that he does this, that they should stick to their knitting. Should they stick to their knitting? What did you think of that?
Well, look, Peter's expressing an understandable frustration.
What's the frustration? They're sharing their views.
No, the frustration is that people think within certain parts of the business community that it's a decision that should be just advocated on their behalf and by a few people, when really what we're saying with our proposal is let's have a plebiscite, let everybody have a say, and Bill Shorten himself has used the words totally relaxed about a plebiscite.
So do you think they should stick to their knitting? Would you give them the same advice?
Well, everyone's entitled to their view.
Well, that's not what Peter Dutton's suggesting.
No, he is saying that through a plebiscite. That's the point.
No, but I'm talking about them intervening, writing a letter, going on the public record.
Yeah.
Do they have the right to do it? Yes or no?
Everybody has a right to write a letter to make a comment.
So what's Peter Dutton talking about?
Because he's saying, rightly, that people are, from their perspective in the business community, they're saying, well, this is an issue that we need to lead on, right, and not allow the broader public a view through a plebiscite, which is our proposal.
You wouldn't tell those CEOs not to speak out then?
Well, CEOs are welcome to speak out on any issue as they want. But in terms of delivering for their shareholders, you would think that they would stick to the economic issues. My views on the gay marriage issue.
So do you think that perhaps it should be revisited, or you expect it to be revisited by your party room?
No, I think our position is been made very clear. We took it to
and there's no way of changing it?
I'm very comfortable with the plebiscite proposal as it stands.
Just finally, the Prime Minister in his tweeting, he's very grumpy about a report on pensions. Was it a bit erratic, all of that tweeting? He was very busy on the Twitter machine.
Well, isn't it good for our Prime Minister and others to be engaging through social media? I think the Prime Minister, again, understandably...
Doesn't it show how sensitive he is about these issues?
Well, he's understandably concerned when stories are written which aren't accurate about the government's intentions. Now, we saw that through the Medicare campaign, and let's face it, it hurt us at the election, and we don't want to see that again. So if people are going to write stories, or stories are going to be proposed by the Labor Party that are not consistent with the government thinking and government policy, then you should call it out as soon as you see it.
Josh Frydenberg, thanks for coming on.
Good to be with you.